Yeah, so again, thank you so much for taking time to do this. This is sort of meant to be more or less a conversational space,
Awesome.
where we talk a little bit about, well, we talk a lot about CIRS, sort
Hmm.
of from different angles, different people that have come in, and you're someone that's highly respected in the CIRS community and certainly in the shoemaker, Dr. Shoemaker community as someone who's sort of innovated the what we would call the coaching space. And in a large part of that is because you are a CIRS patient, and I know you don't necessarily like to talk much about your experience. You do have a very amazing video in your website, and I highly recommend everybody to check it out because it's obviously not an easy thing, but it's at a certain level, it's a very educational sort of video to go through some of what you went through as a patient, and also your family, because it turns out maybe we'll talk a little bit about this. Your family was part of that
Right.
uh, healing journey, and so my idea was perhaps we could talk a little bit about some of that, your experience as a patient, and how that sort of became you sort of devoting your time to the CIRS coaching space and any other
Mhm.
ways in which you've been actively involved with CIRS related, stuff. And so, yeah, the idea would be to maybe talk a little bit about that. And you also are more than welcome to ask me questions, from one patient to another if you
Yeah.
want, as the occasion arises. But yes, I guess I had a chance to look at your video, and one of the initial questions that came in my mind was, when was the point where you transitioned or sort of discovered the idea of CIRS and that, you know, healing journey? Because what happens very often is when we start getting sick, we really have no idea what's going on. We don't have a
Yeah.
framework, we don't have something to work with to kind of get a sense of what's
Yeah.
happening. And so
Yeah.
I guess I wanted to maybe if you could share a little about, like, what was that point where you realized, oh, this is CIRS, and things started clicking in that direction for you?
Yeah. Well, great question. And it's so crazy. Like, we all have such unique stories with this journey of being sick and then figuring out what the reason is. And it can be a really arduous road. And it was unique for our family, but actually a little bit quicker than the path that I see a lot of my clients having been on. But the way it happened for our family, it was actually my husband who was sick first, and he started with acute Lyme disease, and he was on Lyme disease treatment. I mean, he had the classic like bullseye rash, fever, tick embedded. Like he had acute Lyme disease that then turned to chronic. He had been on aggressive antibiotic therapy and Lyme treatment for about 3 years and plateaued. He was actually on disability and was in bed a lot, so he plateaued at not a great level. We did not know at the time that he has what Dr. Shoemaker calls the dreaded haplotype, which is basically the genetics that make us susceptible to developing CIRS from Lyme toxins or mold toxins or algae toxins or brown recluse spider toxins, not just a water damaged building, but it could be the toxins that are produced by Lyme bugs. And so our theory now is that he had actually probably gotten through the acute Lyme, but he had developed CIRS because he was
Yeah.
recirculating these Lyme bugs in his body. And no one told us about taking binders. We didn't know about CIRS at the time. On top of that, our house, no one that I know has visible mold like crawling up their walls, or maybe some people do, but hopefully not. But we were living in this cute little cabin on a homestead that we had built, and we had some stuff going on. Like, there was horizontal rain in the area that we lived, and sometimes our windows would leak or the roof would leak, and we'd put like a bucket under it and just think, oh, this is cute, we're living in the country on a homestead.
Right.
You put a bucket under the leak. Well, we didn't know, there was some mold growing, like in our attic and in our crawl space and in our ductwork and around the windows, all since fixed. But we didn't know that while my husband was trying to get well from Lyme disease with dreaded genes, he was in an elevated hurts me too score house as well. And so we had, a fair bit of mold in our house, not knowing. So it started
This
with
was
him with
this this was where was this? Is this in
This
Georgia
was this
at that time?
was it was technically Georgia, right on the border of Georgia and Tennessee. Lookout Mountain, Georgia is where we were. Yeah, beautiful. We
Got
loved
it.
it. We loved this area. We called it the grand experiment, where our family was trying to live off the land. We were homesteading, growing all our own food. We were on solar. We had a well. We had animals, and we sold our, organic produce at the farmers market and homeschooled our kids. It was an idyllic lifestyle, but we didn't realize that our genetics were not well suited to the
Right.
biotoxins that were all around us outside in our big compost bin and the pond that had an algae issue and all of the ticks in the pasture, and then our little cabin with water damage. Like, it was just everywhere. And so what happened is my husband, wasn't getting better. And so I could no longer kind of take care of him and the farm and homeschool the kids. So I put the kids in this little kind of homeschool tutorial that was held in the basement of an old church. On the first
Mhm.
day of school, my son came home with similar symptoms as my husband. A little bit different, but he came home saying he didn't feel well. Long story short, I won't bore you guys. I know there's like the long version and the short version. But after several months of my husband or my son saying he didn't feel well, I finally said, tell me more about how you feel. And it wasn't like, oh, I kind of have a tummy ache or a runny nose. It was, I'm dizzy. My brain's not
Mhm.
working. My lungs are tingly and they feel like they're really tight. I can't get a good breath, especially when I'm at school. I have diarrhea. I can't sleep at night. I'm like, oh my goodness, you're 9. What? Like, I've never heard of all of these things. Long story short, we had an amazing pediatrician. I took him to the pediatrician. She was really open-minded, and she said, this sounds like something environmental. Where is he going to school? Symptoms
Wow.
started on the first day of school. What has he been
Wow.
exposed to? Can you believe this? Like, it wasn't my idea, it was her idea. And so she said, let's look at radon and lead paint and asbestos. There's something he's being exposed to have these systemic problems. And so when we looked at mold, it was like, boom, jackpot. The mold levels were really high. And so that led me to Googling, like most of us do, like mold and Lyme. I found the work of Dr. Richie Shoemaker connecting chronic disease and mold illness, putting them in this same bucket called CIRS. And I was like, our family, I
Wow.
think both my husband and my son have this. So that led us to then testing our genetics. Yes, lo and behold, we have the 11352B genetics, which are susceptible to developing CIRS from Lyme or water damaged buildings. And I tested myself and my daughter. We had the genes too, though at the time we weren't symptomatic. My husband and my son both had lots of dysregulated CIRSLabs, the classic Shoemaker labs that look at the body's immune dysregulation to the exposure. So instead of looking at like mycotoxins in the urine, we're looking at how is the body reacting to these known exposures. Are there
Mhm.
fingerprints of immune dysregulation, endocrine dysregulation? Yes, the answer was yes for my son or my husband. Yes for my son. And when by the time I got around to testing my own, the stress of trying to figure out what the heck was going on with with my husband for years, but now with my son, I had to pull him out of school. The stress, I believe, had flipped my gene into the odd position because I was fine
Yeah.
until I wasn't. It was almost like I actually saw the light switch go on. I was okay, and then all of a sudden I became symptomatic. And I almost thought, is this in my head? I think I'm just stressed. But all of a sudden I got extremely fatigued, couldn't sleep at night, brain fog, suicidal ideation. Like, what the heck where is this coming from? It didn't seem lined up with circumstances. Yes, I was stressed, but not to this level. So then I went and
Yeah.
got my labs done, and they were all dysregulated. My daughter, sweet daughter, had at that point had kind of never had a bad day. Really great attitude, really great kind of like joie de vivre. not stressed. And even though she had the genetics that the rest of our family had and was in the same exposure at school and at home, she was still, her labs looked beautiful and she was not symptomatic. So one of our goals was to try to protect her from her gene flipping into the on position and for her to be the fourth person in our family to get sick. So sorry if that was kind of the medium version, not the long one, but not the super short. But that's kind of how we figured out, is with Google then. And then we actually
Wow.
booked a call with Dr. Shoemaker because I wanted to learn, is this quackery? Really, I'm Googling this stuff online. And at the
Yeah.
time, this was in 2016, there really wasn't that much. It was just survivingmold.com, and that was kind of it. There were a couple of other blogs. And so I thought, let's go straight to the source. I'm going to book a call with Dr. Shoemaker. It's really expensive. We can do it over the phone and record it because my husband and I both had massive brain fog. And everything that he went through with us was just spot on. I mean, he went through all of our labs, our ERMI reports, all of the testing that we had done to date. He explained the science behind CIRS. After talking with him for an hour, my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, okay, this isn't quackery. He's actually a genius. And I think we need to do what he's recommending. Long story short,
Yeah.
we did. And we all got well. And so a big part of my message is this thing is real. And if you are in the thick of just being sick and scared and looking for answers, I see you. There was a long journey of that, of trying to figure out what doctor can help us. How do we fix our house? What's the right information? That part
Yeah.
is really hard. But I want to offer that hope that with the right treatment and the right treatment of your home and your body, full recovery is absolutely possible. And so that's one of my messages is we can get through this.
Right. And so a couple of things there. First, kudos to you for being so open when you first ran into this Google search, because, from my academic background, when I couldn't figure out what was going on and I started reading some of this mold stuff that you're saying, like I was reading a lot of blogs, some YouTube videos. I was very skeptical. And so I had a lot of good reasons to say this doesn't make any sense. I've never heard of anything like this, right? But you at some point you have to have a certain kind of openness to go after these unknowns. And often what ends up happening is you gain a lot of insight, and this is, I think, what happened to me. It sounds like it's what happened to you in that process of connecting things together at a level that just we're not accustomed to doing. But that was like a really important piece, it sounds, from your transition into figuring this out.
Yeah.
So that's how you met Dr. Shu. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say, now that I'm remembering, is you mentioned the emotional piece, which is something that we haven't quite been able to figure out on the research front, how to measure these things. But I can tell you from my personal experience, my trigger seemed to have emerged 2 months after undergoing a pretty bad earthquake event back home in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
And it was the first time in my life where I felt genuinely having some kind of PTSD, where my body was completely dysregulated in the moment, and my emotional state was they were completely different, they were not coordinated.
Wow.
And it was 2 months after that everything really triggered for me. And I really think that was a very big piece of the puzzle, with the priming event, essentially.
Right.
So
I'm so glad you brought that up, Christian. I know, according to the research that's been done, we know that an inflammatory event can be a priming event. And we talk about that most often as being some kind of illness like COVID or Lyme disease or Epstein-Barr or something like that, or maybe another inflammatory event like some kind of physical trauma, a car accident or something. But so I would say the majority of my clients, if it wasn't something like COVID that triggered them, it was another kind of emotional trauma, like the loss of a loved one, or a divorce or significant stress at work or some kind of big chapter change in their life. So while I don't know that we have the research to back that yet, anecdotally, and more than anecdotally, I would say I see that a lot. I'm so sorry that that was the case with you. It was what happened with me too. It was the stress, and it was the same thing with my daughter. What happened with my daughter when she was not stressed, she was fine. What stressed her out and what was actually traumatic for her is when we told her we had to leave our lifestyle. We had to leave the
Yeah.
farm. We had tried to fix our home. We made every mistake in the book. And we decided, you know, the homesteading life is not conducive to our genetics. We need to go back to living in the suburbs. And we're going to actually move all the way back to Colorado, where it's a little drier. You don't have to do that, but we chose to do that. And that was so traumatic for her, and having to let go of like all of her toys, stuffed animals, friends, relatives, our lifestyle, her school that she loved. That trauma actually triggered her. She became symptomatic during the move. And once we got to our new clean home, that's when she got sick. And just interesting. And then we tested her labs, and lo and behold, they were dysregulated. So it's one of the things that I'm really careful with my clients is minding our nervous system through the whole process, honoring the fact that a dysregulated nervous system or a trauma could be the triggering event, but it can also be a perpetuating factor if we are not minding how our nervous system is doing along with the medical treatment and our home treatment. If we are really stressed or even in kind of a freeze and shut down, our physiology can't heal. We're not digesting food and detoxifying and sleeping well. And that in itself can cause brain fog, you know, when we're in a perpetual sympathetic or dorsal vagal nervous system state. And so one of the things that I like to do is really teach my clients how to find that green zone, I call it, that parasympathetic vagal, you know, we hear the vagus nerve a lot. That's real. It puts our body into that state for healing. And when we're out of that state, it's tough to heal.
Well, and the vagus nerve is it's basically one of the primary ways in which the hypothalamus and the pituitary, all these brain regions, get important information about what's going on in other parts of the body, including the gut, including the liver, a lot of these organs. So they're sending a lot of pro-inflammatory signals. They're going to make their way through the vagus nerve, and they're going to cross through the thalamus, and from there they're going to cross through the hypothalamus and the optic nerves, the cross right there. So we have also a potential connection there with some of the inflammation that we see with the visual contrast test. It's just, you know, there's a point at intersection there that's really important. So I'm glad that you're mentioning that. I'm glad to know that that's something that you work with when you're, you know, with your clients. I think it's important, and I think there's, I mean, as I've been getting better, I'm starting to realize that as the physiology starts self-correcting with treatment, there is going to be some emotional layer that I think you have to work on to sort of start hitting whatever next levels you have to, and that could be in the form of, you know, the neuro brain rewiring programs, or I don't know, mindfulness training. I guess it could depend on the person, but yeah. So
I speak the truth for sure. There's the physical healing, and that for me, you know, going through the protocol, getting into a clean house, detoxing, doing the medical treatments got me really far. I would say maybe to 70 to 80% healing. But then what got me to, I would consider myself like 150% healed because I'm healthier than what I was before I got sick. And I really credit that additional, you know, getting to 100% and beyond to more the mind body stuff, healing some emotional, relational, nervous system things that I think were kind of blockages to full healing. And once I addressed those things, it was like full healing just rushed in. Fixing some of those energy and emotional, relational, spiritual blockages that I personally had. I don't know if that's the case with that, but it was important for me. Yeah.
That's really good to know. And I want to kind of go back to that in a moment. But before that, I wanted to ask a little bit about, so, I mean, so you're now in this coaching space, and I guess that, you know, you had to figure out a lot of stuff in real time as a patient in terms of what it meant to avoid exposure. That's, you know, because that's obviously step number one in the protocol. It's the most foundational important step, but that could potentially mean slightly different things to different people depending on the context and the biotoxin reactivity, the HLAs. And I don't know if you can say something about what was it like sort of becoming essentially your own coach. So figuring out, how did you figure out what counted as exposure, or what did it mean for you to reach that level of removing yourself from exposure, which is, what was it, just a matter of, okay, getting your ERMIs and all these tests in place, and then maybe doing some remediation, or did you have to do other things on top of that, like on a day-to-day basis in terms of cleaning, avoiding certain things? You know, there's probably a lot of intuition that goes into this process that's a little bit tricky to articulate. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
You know, I think this is one of the most confusing aspects of the CIRS journey for most of us is, how do we know where we're getting exposed? How do we fix it? And then how do we keep it that way? And again, this was back in 2015, 2016 that our family was going through this. There really wasn't a lot of information out, and what was out, like online, conflicted with each other. And I think that's kind of still the case. There's a lot of conflicting information. So what I will say is we pretty much made every mistake in the book. We started correctly, I would say. We were starting with using MSQ PCR testing, looking for the DNA of mold in our home, because what we understood from Dr. Shoemaker's work is it's not just live mold spores that could make us sick or be inflammatory or be carrying mycotoxins, but even dead mold that was maybe from a previous issue. So we wanted to know our total burden in our home of live dead, full spores, fragments, all of it, because it all mattered as a CIRS patient. So when we did that ERMI test and we found out like the kids' school was really off the charts, our house wasn't great either, that was then what started us down the path of, what do we do next? So at least we started with that. But that's where we departed from what I now know is like the right path. And so we started hiring, you know, just kind of Joe Schmo inspectors to come and kind of try to help us figure out where it was coming from. They didn't understand that dead mold and fragments of mold can be problematic. And so they're just looking for active moisture. So if something had dried out, you know, they weren't going to find it. And so we did some recommendations on our home that were based on what I say now is bad advice. And then the other thing that we did wrong is we tried to do it all ourselves, and you shouldn't do that.
Okay. And this is in Georgia. Yeah, this is in Georgia, right?
This was in Georgia. Yep. And it was since fixed professionally. But when we tried to fix everything ourselves, I mean, my husband was off there ourselves, not with a remediation team, but kind of like just with an HVAC company. My husband pulled out like all of the mold from the kitchen himself, and then we fixed it ourselves. We basically just spread everything around our house and cross-contaminated our whole house. And then we used thieves oil to try to fog it and kill it at the end, thinking that'll just zap whatever's, you know, whatever's still here. I think we had kind of a loose appreciation that dead mold was problematic. So after we did our quote remediation and spent so much money, you know, to try to fix our house, our ERMI score is worse and our Hertzman score is worse because we had just fragmented so many things and we had ruined most of our furniture. So it was really devastating having to lose our house. We ended up professionally remediating it since then, but we had kind of a family meeting and talked about how maybe living on a homestead where there's just biotoxins everywhere wasn't really the ideal situation for our family anymore. So we decided to move and look for a house that had a clean ERMI, a Hertz Me Too score of less than a 10 at the time. And we found that pretty quickly in Colorado. We had a really hard time finding that in Georgia in the suburbs, but when we moved to Colorado, we found a lot. And I now know that there's more to it. There's endotoxins. We didn't know that at the time. There's actinos. We didn't know any of that at the time. So we were just looking for that low ERMI score and a HERTSMI score of a 10 or less. This house that we moved into had an ERMI score that was in the negatives. I hardly ever see that. It was a
Wow.
HERTSMI of a 0,
Wow.
an ERMI of a -2. We like put an offer in on this house sight unseen. I was like, I just like the ERMI score. I don't care what the house is like. Like it's gonna, like we're moving there. Like I just need for my family to get well.
Yeah.
So, you know, Christian, I would say one of the things I'm most passionate about, in addition to providing hope for clients and helping them find that balanced nervous system state, is how to assess for exposure, and then find the proper people to help them mitigate that exposure, and then how to maintain a clean house afterwards. And so I've built those into modules in an online course that I
Mm-hmm.
offer, and I've been offering that for about 4 years, because there's so much collateral damage financially and emotionally if we do this wrong, and so many of us do. Before we do it the right way, we do it the wrong way. But I'm trying to catch people before they've done it, so they can save money, save time, and start getting their health back quicker by doing this process correctly of figuring out where they're
Right.
getting exposed and fixing it in the right way. And because
Right.
I tell people I made all the mistakes so that you don't have to. No judgment here, but here's the wrong way and here's the right way. Let me save you all of the hassle that our family went through, and the trauma, the collateral damage
Yeah.
that our family went through, and
Yeah.
get it wrong.
Right. And yeah, thanks for bringing in the course modules that you're doing. I do want to pick up something. So you had this transition during treatment from basically the East Coast to a more West Coast location. Did you, and I've had this experience now 2 to 3 times. I used to live in California, and I got sick and I was in Irvine. Then I moved to the East Coast for research positions here, and I can tell you that my body, just being in the East Coast and a lot of these places, it just behaves completely different. There's something in the environment here that my body just is very, very hostile. And I went to CIRSLab in Boulder, it was the same thing. I went back there and I felt way, way, way better, much more tolerant and resilient to having histamine issues, just not reacting to stuff. Even when there's even some potential, water damage exposure if I go somewhere indoors. And I don't know if you had this experience when you moved to Colorado where you felt a little bit like of a difference overall, just being in that environment versus being in Georgia.
Yeah, we did. We didn't feel anything immediately. I think all of us, we had gotten so, like our buckets were so full. We were so traumatized, so stressed out. Like we were carrying our symptoms wherever we went for a while. But we healed so quickly here. I don't know that
Yeah.
we would have healed so quickly
Yeah.
there. And when I watch
Yeah.
my clients in different locales and struggling to get out of a biotoxin home or out of an environment that just keeps hitting them that way, I do see it prolonging their recovery. So it has worked for us. It doesn't for everybody. And water damage can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, we can have a dishwasher leak, and we have, toilet overflows, landscaping drainage issues. That can happen anywhere. But with this dry air and sunshine and the lack of horizontal rain, or at least less, we just don't get the kind of storms that we got where we were living in Georgia, where the rain would just find its way up into these eaves in our house. Like no matter what we did, the rain would find its way in. And here we just don't have that kind of weather. And when there is, let's say, like, my dog knocks over a glass of water on the carpet or something, I sop it up with a towel, throw a dehumidifier on it, and it's dry within like an hour because the ambient humidity is so low. When things do get wet, they dry out so quickly, and so it's an easier lifestyle, I think, for a CIRS patient. I use
Yeah.
this analogy a lot, like hang up a wet bathing suit and it's dry by the end of the day. In Georgia, we would hang up a wet bathing suit and it was growing mold within 2 days and still damp. Like it's just you're fighting nature. So
Yeah.
again, while leaks can happen anywhere, nature is a little bit more on our side, at least for our family. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people don't feel well at the altitude. For us, that hasn't been an issue. So we've been really
Yeah.
blessed here. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been trying to figure out some potential patterns, but again, this is all very hypothetical. But I'm mold susceptible, so mine is 17352B,
Okay.
which is I think not one of the more common ones, but I'm definitely one of these extreme hypersensitive people that reacts within 2 seconds, of some kind of exposure, or at least historically that was my, and that certainly is much more likely to occur in the East Coast, that maybe it's something mold related. Symptoms do intensify in the fall months for me, and in fact, I felt that treatment was stalling just because of the seasonal changes. Like everything I was doing in May and June, it was like very effortless. The body was moving forward, and then I hit these months, and it was like it's just not working the same way.
Interesting. Do you think
Yeah,
it was like decomposing leaves outside, like the outdoor climate impacting you?
I think that's got to be one of the factors. I suspect that leaves. I mean, yeah, you're basically creating a burst or a spike potentially of different organisms in these leaves, including molds, but also bacteria. And like there's going to be soil actinos and things like that. And I guess that might combine itself with also the conditions of the building structures, the building structures that are surrounding, the area that you live. I suspect that has to play a role. But I'm also thinking, is there anything about like jet streams which change and fluctuate that also create? I'm not sure. I haven't quite figured that
Yeah.
out, but it is something that I've been trying to figure out. Is there any way we can actually measure some of these things? And we may have some indirect ways to measure treatment success with patients who are at certain stages, and we look at what time of the year are they doing
Yeah.
treatment. And then maybe it's something that it's specific to certain haplotypes. Maybe it's not
Yeah.
for everybody, like you said. Or if you look at the gene, depending on what's showing up in the gene, certain people might be more susceptible to these kinds of fluctuations. But hopefully we can figure that out, because it seems to me that sometimes the right decision is you just relocate, and remediation might be not the best solution. I don't know if you how you weigh those two things when you're working with someone. You recommend remediation, or if you just recommend
Oh,
relocation.
for
I'm assuming it's on a
sure.
case by case
Yeah, I
basis, like
think,
it
this is
depends.
something
But
that Dr. Shoemaker told my husband and myself when we were on the phone with him back in December of 2015. He said, any house is remediatable. If you want to save your house, we can do it. But you've got to think of, are you going to be living in a bubble where you live? What about the grocery store and the church and
yes,
your office
yes,
and
yes,
school? Are your kids going to be able to go on sleepovers to their friend's house? Like we might be able to, or we can fix your house, but you may have to live in a bubble, definitely while you're in the acute healing phase, and even beyond that, as you're developing that kind of capacity to handle a little bit more of the everyday exposures and be more resilient. If you're living in an environment where the majority of buildings are water damage, in addition to stuff going on outside, seasonally, it's just harder to get well and stay well, I think. So that was one of the big reasons why our family decided, let's put ourselves in a climate that is at least conducive to our health. More so,
yeah,
none's perfect, but as best as we could reasonably do. And we had actually lived in the Denver area before we moved to Georgia just to start this homestead. So it was kind of like just moving back home.
yeah.
And then, you manage your indoor environment as best as you can. There's one thing that I wanted to share, though, related to seasonal changes. It can also impact our indoor air quality.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like
yeah.
what might be pumping through our air conditioning system in the winter or in the summer that we're reacting to, that then goes away in the winter, or what might be pumping through our furnace and our heater that's a little different than in the summer. Like we can react differently to, different air conditioning systems. And then, like the microbes, both mold and bacteria that tend to live under or around our house, especially if we have a crawl space, they bloom and kind of fluctuate seasonally as well. And so our indoor air quality is influenced by what's under it. So especially if we have that crawl space, seasonally, whatever's going on under there in the, say, the summer or the fall can come up into our living space and then maybe dissipate in the winter and early spring. And so it's hard to put your finger on exactly what's going on, but our indoor air quality can absolutely change with external seasonal changes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think that's been my intuition too, that things that are already ongoing, and even if the building is not water damaged, but if there's any vulnerable areas in these times of the year, there's suddenly, there were times where I started reacting to some corner in the apartment, like the shower or something, and it would be during these times. And I mean, and there could be very immediate ways in which the outdoor air impacts that, but then also can indirectly contribute to perhaps an intensification of how sensitive you are to things that otherwise your body might not be reacting to in different conditions. So I really like that you picked up on this other layer of, what kind of more general environment could be optimal for a given individual, and that might be part of the equation to kind of move forward with healing and treatment for CIRS. So that's really, I think that's an important piece of the puzzle, or at least for some patients.
Well,
I
one
wanted to
additional thing, Christian, I don't think that I said this and I meant to. I kind of went off on a tangent. I apologize. But
That's
while
okay.
every house is remediatable, you might have to live in a bubble. For some people, that's worth it. And so if I'm working with a client and they say, I love my home, I really want to save it, and I really like where I live. My grandkids are here, or this is, where my friends are. I think it also matters where we have supportive community and maybe where a job is and where a family is. And those things can be very a part of our healing journey. And so moving ourselves to the desert just for, maybe less humidity or biotoxins, but we also have less access to maybe clean food, community, family, jobs. We have to weigh all of those things. We're a whole person, body, mind, spirit, relationships, community. And so, usually I'll help my clients kind of assess all of those things and see it all as part of the picture while they're deciding, do I stay or do I go? So there's not one right answer for everybody. It really depends on how they answer all those questions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a really good point. And I mean, because as you mentioned at the beginning, there's an emotional component that's really important for healing. And if part of that is understanding where you want to be in terms of, your family, your social life, and being able to bring that into the picture, at some point that has to play a role in healing. So that's a very good point. And, for someone like me, I'm from Puerto Rico, so I'm already away from my, natural hat in that sense. So maybe for someone like me, the moving, relocating, it's not only more available to me, but it might be something that has more profound effects just because I'm already outside my, where I grew up. And what's really interesting about this is Puerto Rico is insanely humid. It's as moldy as you can think of. What was really interesting is before I got sick with CIRS, I remember every time I was doing grad school, and at the beginning I was at Penn State University, and I was living in a basement, and I got really sick there a couple of times before getting CIRS. But every time I would go back to Puerto Rico for holidays, I would actually feel a lot better. Even though I had a lot of weird symptoms there, my body would kind of just go up, and I would tolerate foods better. I felt much more relaxed. So there might be something to what you're saying there, that even though it may be a very hostile environment in many ways from a physiological perspective, it is where I grew up and where I was born, and my family's there. And I don't know what that means now after treating CIRS, but certainly before, there seemed to be an effect of that for me.
Yeah, interesting. Well, if you go back, I would want you to be in a clean house there.
Yeah,
So you get the benefits of the family and clean air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. I haven't been back there. Actually, I went there when I was really sick, and it was kind of chaotic, but I hadn't started treatment back then. So we'll have to see. I wanted to ask you, in terms of, so when you started this whole sort of path of treatment, I don't think the NeuroQuant wasn't around, and certainly the Genie wasn't around. Is
The
that correct?
NeuroQuant was. So we had the
Okay.
NeuroQuant, and we had all of the blood labs, just not the Genie. And we weren't
Okay.
doing endotoxin or actino testing yet for our environment. So we were just looking at mold
Got it.
and the classic Shoemaker labs and the NeuroQuant for the most part. Yeah. And so that's what our
Okay, and the NeuroQuant, did it provide some confirmation of the illness at that
it
time
did.
for any of you?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, that part was really
Okay.
interesting. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, that was the most, someone who been doing research in the brain. When I got my NeuroQuant, it was the most validating piece because there was a lot of damage that was popping up in the NeuroQuant. And
Which is
yeah, okay, so
scary
that's,
when you first see it.
yeah.
It's scary,
And
but also
that's
confirming, like, well, no wonder my brain doesn't feel right. When your doctor can say, if this part of your brain is atrophied or hypertrophied, which would be swollen, this might be how you feel with that going on.
yeah.
And you're like, well, yes. So it is very affirming. And then when you receive the good news that this isn't permanent, usually when you have a brain scan done, you're kind of told, all right, this is your brain. Like brains aren't plastic. So this whole
Yeah.
concept of neuroplasticity is really new to this century. I was trained in physical therapy. I'm a physical therapist and I graduated in 2000. We graduated before we had all of this news about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. And so we really didn't know, except for a short window, after maybe an acute injury, that our brain could really do a whole lot of healing. And so this is
Right.
fantastic news that our brain can heal, and specifically related to CIRS and the Shoemaker protocol, we see that atrophy normalizing. We see the hypertrophy, the swelling coming down. We see all of the brain structures normalizing and symptoms coming back. And that's just such amazing news to get our brains back.
It is.
So, yeah.
And I can say that even now in 2024, the concept of neuroplasticity, obviously, if you're someone who's studying the brain, this is a thing. But even by the standards of sort of, let's say, mainstream science, the type of neuroplasticity that we see with the Shoemaker treatment, especially once you do VIP, it's something that's unheard of. Nobody will talk about that like at that level. It's like still what you're saying. There's a conception that if you're someone who has cognitive decline, that cognitive decline, first of all, is something that happens to everyone, and to some extent that's true, but not. I think there's a lot to be understood about how much the capacity that the brain has over the lifespan to adapt and actually optimize the brain. And I think the Shoemaker protocol, what it reveals is that, and to me, it's like looking several decades into the future of research, of thinking about neuroplasticity. So that's one of the reasons I became so fascinated by this. So, okay, and so I wanted to quickly talk a little bit about your experience with VIP. What was that like? How long were you on VIP, and how long did it take for you to start feeling normal again?
I was only on VIP for 4 months, and I felt
Whoa.
so
Okay.
good. It was expensive, and so I was feeling so good, and my labs had all normalized. Like before starting VIP, my MSH was in the double digits, but low, like maybe 12 or something like that. So it was still pretty low. And my TGF beta 1 was still a little bit high, and my MMP9 was still a little bit high, even though I had been on the low amylose diet and was doing the fish oil and gotten out of exposure and taking the binders. And so and didn't have Marcons anymore, eradicated Marcons. So when I went on VIP, one of the cool things about VIP is it can normalize in one fell swoop pretty much all of the labs that are under it in the Shoemaker pyramid. It can normalize all of those labs, and it did that for me. It didn't bring my MSH up to 35, but it doubled it in 2 months. So by the next time I did my labs, 2 months after VIP, my MSH was 24. Like it had never been, I hovered between like less than 8, maybe 12 was my highest. And within 2 months, it was a 24. I was like, oh my gosh. And
Wow.
then I think by the time I quit VIP, it was 2 months after that. And so my MSH had come up to like, I think 28 or something maybe. And so I was pretty excited about that. But the cool thing is, and then my TGF beta 1 and my MMP9 were totally within range. But I felt so good. I felt like I'm just ready to identify as a well person. I don't want to be on medications anymore. I don't want to put my money towards this anymore. I felt normal. And so I didn't feel like I needed to stay on it. So I got off the VIP spray, and a couple months later, I redid some of my labs, and my TGF beta 1 stayed normal. My MMP9 stayed normal. My MSH did go back down. It didn't go down to -8 again, but it went down to like a 15. So I lost that 28 that I had. Um, so there's a part of me that's like, dang it, I want to be like, I want to be good on paper and not just symptoms. But at that time, I had treatment fatigue and I was feeling so good. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to keep going and living my life. And if I start to not feel well, then I'll get back on VIP and I'll keep working on why is my MSH low. A lot of people don't ever bring up their MSH, and we're still trying to figure out why. Is it,
Yeah.
what's going on there? But I was satisfied with my treatment and again ready to kind of start living my life. And that's when I then went and studied with Dr. Shoemaker formally. I guess that was in late 2018, early 2019. I decided I need to learn everything possible about this protocol so that I can take care of myself and my family going forward. I need to know kind of all the research and why, all the whys behind everything. And so that's when I got trained with Dr. Shoemaker. I think it was around this time 5 years ago. Um, and so I've been kind of like tracking myself in addition to working with clients, tracking my own, when we learn about new things like endotoxins and the genie and the actinos, I always test myself, where do I stand on all these things? So it's fun to be a perpetual learner, but I have not had a relapse in symptoms despite being a double 11.3 52B. And it's been 7 years now, almost 7 years, about 6 years, maybe 6 years of like full healing without a relapse. And so,
Wow.
so I just
Do you take
feel
yeah, do you
sorry.
occasionally
Go ahead.
take binders or VIP? Do you do any low maintenance dose for these
I
or
do.
anything? Okay.
Yeah, I do. So not VIP. I haven't done that. I could. But again, it's expensive and, I need to have a prescriber, prescribe that for me. Um, but my original doctor that I was working with has me on kind of a perpetual refill of cholestyramine as needed. And so we just keep that in our medicine cabinet as a family. And if we happen to go somewhere where we're all like, oh my gosh, that was so moldy, I'm the hooch of the family. Like I can still tell. I have less of that than before. Like, gosh, when we first moved here, I could tell like immediately my face would burn, my brain would get tingly, I would get a headache and dizzy. Like I could tell if we were being exposed right away. And now it takes a little longer, but I can still kind of smell it. I can, or you can see it. You can just sense it sometimes.
Yeah.
And so if I know, oh my gosh, you guys, that movie theater was so bad, we've got to go home and take cholestyramine. We'll all take cholestyramine for 3 days just to purge whatever we, soaked up. And we're still vigilant. I say we don't live in a bubble, so we're not living in fear, but we're living in proactive awareness, I would say. And so when we notice, ooh, that building doesn't look good, we just don't go in it again. We come home and take binders, but it's not like we don't get symptomatic.
Okay, well, that's super incredible information because that last step of going back to some kind of normality, well, it's something that a lot of people wonder, and we don't get to see many of those in the public space. And one of the reasons is when people heal, well, they want to move on. They don't necessarily want to be, thinking about
Right.
CIRS 24 hours. They just want to, live their
Yeah.
lives. But, when someone like you is around, we have you as a resource, and to hear that is very, very encouraging. Of course, there's always going to be some level of management with the illness, but my sense is that, yeah, people who complete and graduate from this
Yeah.
treatment, they get to live a very productive, very functional life. And if anything, we have a body that can warn us if there's potential
Yeah.
danger in a way that could we may be the people who can sort of tell apart, what are the situations that could become sort of a chronic inflammatory situation for other people who really don't have the susceptibility, but still could get impacted by poor conditions of indoor spaces, and they're living in these
Yeah.
cases, right? And so
We do
that's super good to know.
periodic testing too, like, well, at least for several years after our family recovered, I would make all of us go get our CIRS labs at least once a year just to kind of keep tabs on everything and make sure nothing was climbing up. We would also do an ERMI on each level of our floor every year just to keep tabs on things. Because my thought was, I want to catch something soon. I don't want somebody to get really sick before we realize that we've had an exposure. So that's been helpful. We've just kind of put in the budget a certain amount of money every year for everybody to get their labs done and do the ERMIs. And then we use the VCS test if anyone's feeling funky. Or if like when we all got COVID, we did the VCS test kind of during and after to see, did this prime something again? Like, are we kind of catching something early? And so we kind of know what our baseline VCS scores look like. And so if
Yep.
anyone, gets sick, we'll use that as a measure of, did this trigger a relapse? And it actually did for my son. The first one of us to have a relapse was my son. He had a simultaneous exposure at school. He was 17. He's in high school now. So they had a water leak at school at the same time that he was on the tail end of a recovery from CMV, a virus. And so he was a little still sick from this virus, had this water damage exposure, and was stressed, like as just a junior in high school. And we picked up that he was relapsing in CIRS. And so we got him back on treatment with binders. We pulled him out of school. We have a Section 504 plan with the school, allowing him to study from home and Zoom in if there's ever a water damage event at
Wow.
school. So we were able to enact that and keep what could have been a massive CIRS relapse and really reel that into a fairly minor one. And so that was about a year ago. I would say it took us maybe 6 to 9 months to fully kind of reel that back and get everything back to where it was to begin with. And now he's feeling great again.
I'm glad to hear that
Yeah.
you were able to figure that out. Yeah, schools are notoriously
Yeah,
problematic. I feel that's like a global thing.
totally.
For some reason, schools are just terrible. But I'm glad that there was a remote accommodation, and that's certainly been my situation. I've had to transition to just working remote full time
Yeah.
now because university campuses are, well, they tend to be quite difficult.
Yeah.
And yeah, you do what you can, but I'm really glad to hear your son is was able to recover from that. I do want to really quickly say, someone asked what is VIP, and I just want to clarify. So that's vasoactive intestinal peptide. It's basically a neuropeptide, a hormone, if you want to think of it, that's naturally produced in our bodies, primarily in parts of the brain. And we lose the ability to produce, one of the things that happens with CIRS is we lose the ability to produce this peptide that regulates a whole bunch of different functions in the body. And as we lose that, it's one of the correlating factors that seem to propel us to start getting sicker and sicker over time. And part of the treatment, which is really the last step of the shoemaker treatment, is to go, when Jenny just talked about this, to go through a period of a nasal spray containing VIP. So you start supplementing with that. And what Shoemaker and his colleagues have been able to show is that you can correct a lot of the abnormalities, if not all of the abnormalities that we see in terms of blood markers and brain abnormalities and all of these things, symptoms resolution. This seems to be the sort of the step where a lot of people regain a lot of functionality, some normality, and a lot of resiliency to the environment. So that's what we're referring to with VIP for the person who asked. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Well, I mean, technically we're supposed to be wrapping up. I do want to give you a, if you already mentioned your course module, but if you want to plug in a little bit about what you're currently offering and where can people find you.
Yeah,
You can certainly
sure.
do.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I trained with Richie Shoemaker about 5 years ago, and my goal with that was to train myself so I could take care of myself and my family and continue working as a physical therapist. But then I started getting on Facebook and all these Facebook groups and answering questions and trying to help people and getting more and more involved in the CIRS world and less interested in physical therapy. And my husband is like, maybe, well, you're shoemaker trained. What, you could probably charge for this and just be a coach or something. And so, you know, I think all of the other people, my colleagues in the surviving mold world, were clinicians who are prescribing and, you know, treating people for CIRS. And I don't have that licensure as a physical therapist. I'm also a health coach now. So I kind of made up the role of a coach and consultant. I went and got trained as a functional medicine health coach. And then I used my shoemaker training to consult. And so I just serve people either privately or I have group programs. I have a support group. I have an online course. And so there are a variety of ways that people can work with me if they either want consulting, which is help me understand this and what would you guide me to do next? Like, how do I clean my stuff? How do I plan a move? How do I understand my ERMI results? What should I expect out of the shoemaker protocol? How do I find a doctor? These kinds of things. Or coaching, which is more of a one-on-one relationship where we might meet regularly and I would be your advocate and your cheerleader, making sure, while you have brain fog, making sure these things are actually happening. And so setting goals and targets and action steps. So that's more kind of coaching versus the education is more consulting. So I put both hats on. Simplified Wellness Designs is is the company that I built to provide those services. The CIRS Healing Collective is my absolute favorite thing. That's the community that I built for CIRS patients to come together. We share our stories, we share what we've learned so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I bring in expert guests from my community to learn from, and that's where the online course is hosted as well. It's on a mighty network called CIRS Healing Collective. So those are some of the things that I do.
Wow.
SimplifiedWellnessDesigns.com is where more information can be found if anyone's interested. Yeah.
That's great. And you're affiliated with the CIRSX group, right? Am I
Yes.
right in saying that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a faculty member with the CIRSX Institute, which is pretty cool. It's a new arm of CIRSX that is unveiling a lot of certification courses. So this is awesome. There's a remediation certification course for current remediators to get certified in CIRS standards. So that's one course that CIRSX is about to launch, I think in like a month. There's a legal course for attorneys to learn how to win a mold case. And so that is already launched through the CIRSX Institute. And then the one that I'm about to launch, or that I was asked to build by the CIRSX folks, is a coach and consultant certification course. So for other people who are maybe not a doctor, but really have been through CIRS, or maybe they're already a health coach, or maybe a nutritionist, or a social worker, or an occupational therapist, an allied health professional, and they want to know, where do I fit in? Like, I want to have CIRS training so that I can, you know, be part of the solution after my own maybe healing. That's what the CIRSX coach and consultant is really designed for, is to help people in the coaching and allied health professional field find their niche in this professional community. So that'll be launching this spring.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and CIRSX is coming up, and I think I was there in Boulder. You
look
were there as well, right?
familiar now that I see who you are. I remember you were kind of out in the tables a lot, and sometimes in the lecture hall. I recognize you now. So good to put a face with the name and make that connection. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you know, I'm hoping to join next year or this year as well. So hopefully we can connect a little bit more there. But
awesome.
What you're doing for this community is incredible, and I hope you can continue growing all of that. And yeah, thank you, you know, for sharing your story as a patient, and also for sharing your your knowledge and experience with this illness. And yeah, I'm sure, I mean, many people are commenting on sort of how grateful they are. So yeah, thank you, Jenny, so much for being here.
For being such a great host, Christian. There's one other thing that I wanted to bring up for people who might be interested in this, I'm in the process of building a documentary of sorts of success stories. And this is something that I think we really need. Like you said, so many people who get well from CIRS then just go take off and start living their life. And it's almost like traumatic to come back into this community and talk about their story. And so they leave and we don't get their story. And so I've gone out and tried to capture all of these stories, like clients of mine or just people that I've known who've healed from CIRS, and I've recorded their success story. And so I have about eight of these success stories collected. I'm going to record 2 more and then have a professional editor put it together. And I mean, it's not going to be a professional documentary because I didn't go around and, you know, go around the world like that would have been super cool. But still make it a pretty attractive and hopeful video that can be shared with the public so that we can all have hope that if they can heal, even when they had a story that sounds a lot like mine, like they had all of these crazy sensitivities, all of these things layered on top of CIRS, they were sick for years, they still got well, and then I can too. So stories of hope will be coming soon.
Is that coming this year at some point, or is it going to take a little bit longer?
Oh, I hope so. So, you know, between the CIRSX Institute, launching the course, and then, you know, just some of my own work and putting this together, I have a lot on my plate for this year, but I'm super passionate about it. Like, I'm excited to get it out. So I just have 2 more recordings, and then I'm going to start working with an editor. So okay. I've never done anything like this before. So I think surely it couldn't take a year to edit something, but maybe it does. I don't know. But hopefully in 2024, yeah, that would be my hope.
Well, that's incredibly excited. I'm really excited to see that come out. So thank you for sharing that. And I look forward to seeing that. So great. Well, thank you again, Jenny. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining. I hope you all have a good rest of the day and week, and stay healthy, stay safe. So yeah, thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Christian. Bye.
Bye.